The Red River Farm Network is celebrating the role of women in agriculture. It is our special series we call Agriculture. We couldn't do it without our sponsors, Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council, Minnesota Corn Growers Association, Ag Country Farm Credit Services, North Dakota Corn Council, and Van On and Company. Our guest, a good friend, Kristin Duncanson, owner and partner with Highland Farms near Mapleton, Minnesota. Kristin, first of all, pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Don. It's always a pleasure working with you. You're still one of my all-time favorites.
I look back, I think you and I first crossed paths when you were in leadership with the Minnesota Soybean Growers. So that was like, what, 2002, 2003, right?
It was. It actually, yes, it was. I joined the Soybean Growers Board actually in 1996 and was in the leadership role, in the early 2000s. And you were still at another radio station then. And it's been a pleasure ever since.
Before that, though, you had experience in D.C. working for Senator Boschwitz. Tell me how that came to be.
Oh, a really fun and interesting time in my career. I did not grow up on a farm. I married into one. But I went to work as an intern for Senator Boschwitz when I was doing my undergrad at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. I was a political philosophy and speech major, believe it or not. Has nothing to do with what I do now. No, I'm kidding. Everything, liberal arts, way to go. And I went to be an intern there and was assigned to food, agriculture, nutrition, and forestry as an intern, and then was hired back when I finished my undergrad in those same areas, which I didn't know a lot about, but learned quickly from Rudy himself, as well as a gentleman named Dan Pearson and another guy named Randy Russell. And I was a writer then, and then started to be able to track some legislation and meet with constituents. Believe it or not, my husband then became one of our interns in the ag department. And the rest is all history. Although if you ask Rudy about it, he'll give you a play-by-play and tell you how he was responsible for this long-term relationship that has grown to be Highland Family Farms.
I love that. I look back at Rudy and, you think of the plaid shirts and the super duper milk house at the state fair, but he really had a significant role in farm policy at that time.
Yes, he did. I mean, those were in the days where we were talking about decoupling and the PIC program, payment in kind program. Remember, agriculture at that time was a different bit of a different world. I do remember one of my first memories as an intern was seeing tractors down the mall and people dumping corn on the mall in Washington, D.C. We had embargoed the Soviets at the time, and that was kind of the representation or retaliation that farmers had. In the early 80s, farming was tough. We had a lot of interaction with constituents who were going through a tough time. So he was deeply engaged to a dairy policy was really his forte. And Dan Pearson and Randy and other people on the team with Rudy and David Bourne from Oklahoma, a good colleague. We had a lot of great colleagues, and it was very bipartisan time in agriculture then. Folks at USDA were really attuned to, and not that they aren't now, to those programs at that time too. So, I'm very, very grateful for that time. Feel very comfortable still after 40 some odd years going back to DC and walking those halls and working with members of the delegation.
So we talked about your leadership with Minnesota Soybean. You were the first woman president with Minnesota Soybean Growers, also the first female in charge leading Minnesota AgriGrowth Council, breaking ceilings. Tell me what that experience was like.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I was also the first female outside salesperson at Hubbard Milling Company. After I left the Senate, I went to work for Hubbard for the Comfer family. That was an interesting time too. It was an adjustment for lots of folks. We made it through. I have lifelong friends from all those experiences. And there were lots of folks that, like yourself, Don, who became great mentors and were always great conversationalists about what really mattered to agriculture and to our industry, not just in Minnesota, but across the upper Midwest. And I'm grateful for that. You know, they think of some of the folks that were at the companies then during those days at Cargill and at General Mills and CHS, also great partners within those groups. So I really look back at that time very fondly. Learned a lot. That was during the early biodiesel days when I was at Minnesota Soy, and the legislation actually had just passed in Minnesota the year before I was the president. So we had some work to do to get that ready to go across the state. Um, and, you know, I think we really were working hard on new uses for soybean oil and for meal. And fascinating time, as well as production issues when we were talking about disease and research to what cyst nematode or rust and all those things that were on the forefront then. And I learned a lot. And like I said, have lifelong friends from those experiences. So grateful for that time. Yeah, not without its challenges. My husband will say that I had to work a bit harder because I was the first female. But he too, always great support of my kids, great support with all those endeavors at the time. And our family looks fondly on those years.
You mentioned your mentors, your role models. I know you've taken on that role with a lot of young people coming into the industry as well. How important is it that we have those connections as we go about our lives?
You know, I don't know where I'd be without the network. And now too is my role has really changed. And over the years, I now work in a kind of a different area in conservation on working lands with some NGOs. But mentors in the network are really important. I was looking at the other women that you have interviewed for this series, Don, and so many of those people were my mentors, and I'm hoping that I've become theirs. But as farmers, we can sometimes feel really isolated. It's easy to get really caught up in your own zip code, as we say here at Highland. So the ability to be able to give a call to someone who lives in the valley or someone who lives in Kentucky and find out they may be having the same issue we are, whether it's from a business point of view or a public relations or a government or an agronomic or manure management or the hog side of our business. Networks are important, and social media is great, but the one-on-one is even better.
You've always had that ability to look big picture, I think, where, yeah, we all get locked into phones and sitting on our iPad and recliner at night and those kind of things. How do we step back? How do you tell people to step back and look at that bigger picture? Look at everything around us instead of that narrow focus that we may have with technology.
Yeah, well, I tell you, I work hard at it. It's because it's a value for our family and a value for me before I even started at Highland. You have to keep your picture big. Uh, One of the things that we always tell younger people coming into agriculture is make sure you check the markets and the weather in South America and across the rest of the globe before you make a huge decision about how you're going to work on your farm. But I do work hard at it, not only from a network and relationship, but just looking at sources of where do you get the news? What is what are the conditions in Brazil today? Is there some sort of situation in India that could play into U.S. agriculture, and not just the commodities that we grow, but here at our farm, but commodities across the country. And what are the Europeans thinking about butter? You know, all those kind of things. They're interesting to me, but also I hope they're valuable to agriculture as we continue to go forward.
You used the word value earlier, values, and I look at community service. I think that's maybe a principle that you've been focused on really throughout your time as well.
Yeah, community service is something that our parents instilled in Pat and I, and that is, one of our pillars here is without the strong rural communities, um, we just don't, we're not able to do what we do. And that could be anything from being supportive at the school to being aware of what's happening in a community that may have a struggle. Something happened in our little town recently. The hardware store had to go to business. So now if I need an O-ring for some piece of equipment, I'm driving to Mankato. Well, that's not terribly sustainable. So we've got to look at how can we get those services. And Amazon, Amazon's an option, but it's actually not fast enough during harvest. Daycare is important, looking at those things. But I got to tell you, one of the coolest opportunities I have right now is I sit on the board of Glenn Taylor's Family Farm Foundation. And Glenn has made a very generous donation to the foundation of some farmland. And the rent from that farmland is explicitly message to us to reinvest in rural communities. And so in 21 counties in Minnesota and 9 counties in Iowa, all places that have been important to Taylor, whether it's been employees that live there or farms that he has farmed or a place he grew up, we are able to grant out some funds to them to help keep those communities strong. And it is one of the coolest opportunities I've had in my career. And I'm flattered that the Taylor family asked me to help with it. And we're in our second granting period, and it's been really interesting and fun to get to know some communities that I'm not horribly familiar with.
How cool is it though when you take a look? Certainly, we have public-private type of enterprises, but really the philanthropic type of effort that comes with something like that.
It's amazing, and I don't think that people realize how many families, farm families in particular, are incredibly philanthropic. They realize that how important rural communities are, but they're kind of quiet about it. They're not going to send out a press release about a gift, a donation of time or money or whatever it is, or thought or strategy within those communities. So nonprofit work that keeps communities strong is really the unsung hero in a lot of ways, that I don't think everyone appreciates.
You just work with NGOs. Educate me, bring me up to speed on what you're involved in now.
Yeah, interesting. I've done this for 12 years, be involved in some policy development with NGOs. NGOs are the ones I work with are mostly in the environmental space, and they have an interest in seeing what's possible to help with environmental services out here. That means how can we capture carbon, or how do we control erosion, and how do we make soil better? And so I feel like one of my jobs is to kind of ground truth some of the ideas they have. These are good people. They'll working with some of them, they'll have some great ideas about cover crops or nutrient management, but is that possible and productive and profitable for farmers? And that's where, and I'm not alone in this endeavor, that's where we kind of come in and say, okay, this could work. Remember, we're working with a biological system. We probably only have 50 chances in our lives to plant a crop and harvest it. So we're pretty careful and strategic about what we're doing. We are very, very good stewards, but we need to be thoughtful on how we act and what we do, whether it's planting rye for a cover crop and trying to take it to grain. Well, that's a great idea, but do we have a market for that rye, or are we just going to plow it under? What does a cover crop look like? How can we share the data on what happens to soil when cover crops have been planted? How easy it? What do I do? So working through all of those things. Sometimes it means that we're still working with Congress about funding or just policy suggestions on on soil health or conservation. So, at the end of the day, it's really about clean water globally, great air, um, and being able to still be productive and profitable on farmland across the globe, and not degrade anything, but make it better.
We all know the importance of advocacy and farmers telling their story, but sometimes that gets us out of our comfort zone. How do you encourage people to step up and do that?
So I wish it was a, a set of instructions. I think you have to meet people where they are and make them realize that you are taking a bit of a risk, but that risk will benefit a reward at the end. Some people that's just not their jam, and that's fine. Their jam is something else. Other people need a little prodding to get that done. Um, sometimes my family accuses of me of being too much of an advocate, and not enough of other things, but we're getting there. Uh, yeah, so you need to mentor and walk with them on that journey a bit. I'm working with a great group of younger farmers from across the country right now, and some of them you just say, okay, it's your turn to tell this story and your story and why this is important, and you coach a little, you coach a lot. But I love that. And I'm hoping that some folks um, are willing continually to be willing. Time is an interesting thing too. As we find fewer and fewer people out here doing what we do, it's tough to ask for their time. So if you ask just for a little bit of time to get that advocacy work done, hopefully we can get more and more to just give a little. Um, Being involved in a commodity group sometimes can be a huge time commitment. You have to make sure that everything at home is okay before you go out and do that. And I would say too, I've had great industry partners, Don, that have made helped with advocacy, helped with my writing, um, and done things when I've just not felt like I had that skill set. But looking for partners is also a really good way to get people to learn to advocate.
It's got to be rewarding when you say working with, say, that younger group of farmers and see them picking up the ball and moving forward.
Oh yeah, it's great. There's a young guy from Mississippi that raises cotton, and I knew nothing about cotton. I mean, it's pretty. That's all I knew. I learned so much from him, and being able to just kind of swap stories, starting with what you know. His knowledge level of what it takes to grow cotton is amazing, and I'm hoping that he's learned something from me about soybeans and corn. And that's kind of where you start is what's your comfort zone, meeting people where they are, and then making sure that they are comfortable in telling their story.
Well, you've been very gracious with your time. Just any final thoughts? This is a series where we're focused on women in agriculture. Any message you want to leave us with?
I'm so grateful for all the folks who I've been able to meet on this journey. Um, we just starting my 39th cropping year here. And like I said, I didn't grow up on a farm. I keep telling my farming partners that that's a good thing, because I maybe have had to learn it, and to them it's kind of innate. But people shouldn't be afraid. And I'm here again. I'm just grateful for people like you, people like people that I've met along the way. So thanks again. I'm super flattered to be part of this series.
Very cool. Always great to talk, Kristin. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not kidding. I watched Leah Halverson is a good friend of mine. And I watched the piece you did with Leah. And we're gonna push Leah next year at Apex. She's gonna do on our presentation about her business, about 10 Acre. And I don't know how much you know about Apex, but Apex is pretty high level folks, like they're CEOs and of some pretty
Yeah.
substantial farms. and her family's been a member for years. But yeah, I'm very excited. She and her team are gonna present, which will be super fun.
They've done some amazing things in a very short time.
Yeah.
Kristin, again, thank you. We really appreciate it. It's our special series we call Agriculture, as we visit with Kristin Duncanson, again from Mapleton, Minnesota.